The helicopter's blades hammered the night air, their rhythm like a war drum announcing the arrival of chaos. Dust and debris spiraled through the desert darkness as the aircraft descended toward a crude landing zone. Flares burned in the distance, painting the horizon with streaks of orange, and the staccato of automatic gunfire echoed through the mountains. Inside the cargo bay, soldiers gripped their rifles tighter, each man and woman's face tense, their eyes darting to one another as the red interior lights flashed. They had all seen combat before, but this night carried a weight none of them could shake. Then the call came through the headset of Captain Alyssa Grant, a seasoned Army pilot who had spent the better part of a decade flying missions no one wanted. She wasn't sitting in a cockpit now, she was supposed to be grounded, reassigned temporarily to a joint task force in an advisory role. But when the SEAL commander shouted into the radio, his voice ragged and cut with urgency, it froze every man in the bird. "Is there a combat pilot here?" The SEAL's demand echoed across the comms. His team was pinned in a valley, their own pilot taken out by a lucky RPG hit. They needed extraction now, or they would be overrun. In the back of the helicopter, Alyssa stood without hesitation. She didn't say a word at first, didn't make some dramatic gesture. She simply reached up, tightened the strap of her Kevlar helmet, and gave a sharp nod. The crew chief blinked at her, realization dawning. She was the only one qualified in that moment to do the job. She stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying steel. "I can fly. Get me the controls." The Army Rangers in the bay glanced at her, some wide-eyed, some relieved. The Navy crewmen exchanged looks, half in disbelief. A SEAL lieutenant on the headset barked again, this time more frantic. "We've got less than 10 minutes. Who the hell is flying us in?" "She is," the crew chief said, jerking his thumb toward Alyssa. For a second, silence settled inside the bird, broken only by the thump of rotors and the rattling of gear. Then, with quiet authority, Alyssa stepped into the cockpit, slid into the pilot's seat, and adjusted the controls like she had been born with them in her hands. Her co-pilot, a nervous lieutenant barely out of flight school, stammered, "Ma'am, are you?" "Strap in," Alyssa said sharply, flipping the switches. "We're going in." The helicopter banked hard, diving back toward the valley where smoke and chaos boiled out of the mountainside. The SEALs below were cornered, their position lit up by tracer fire. The extraction zone was a nightmare. Narrow, surrounded by ridges crawling with insurgents, and barely large enough to land in. It was suicide. And yet, Alyssa's jaw set as her hands danced over the controls. She muttered just loud enough for herself, "Not tonight." As they descended, bullets slapped against the helicopter's armor, the metallic clang ringing like church bells of death. The co-pilot panicked, hands hovering uselessly near the stick. "We're not gonna make it." "Focus on the gauges," Alyssa barked. "Call me the numbers, engine temp, fuel flow. That's your job. Mine is getting us down there in one piece." The chopper plunged lower, weaving between bursts of enemy fire. Alyssa's eyes scanned the ridgeline, looking for the telltale flash of another RPG tube. She spotted one, a dark figure shouldering the weapon against the pale moonlight. Instinct took over. She rolled the bird hard left, pulling the nose down in a daring maneuver that sent every soldier in the bay grabbing for straps and rails. The missile whooshed past, missing by feet. Cheers erupted in the back, but Alyssa didn't waste a breath. She lined up with the narrow clearing, pushing the helicopter down fast, skids kicking up sand and gravel. The SEAL team below fired back furiously as they sprinted toward the bird. One man stumbled, hit in the leg, and another dragged him forward. Alyssa kept the rotors low, the engine straining as she fought to balance lift with the unstable ground. Her headset crackled as the SEAL commander's voice came through, "We're coming aboard." 30 seconds. "30's too long," Alyssa muttered. "You've got 15. Move it." The gunner at the door unleashed a storm of rounds into the ridge, buying precious seconds. The SEALs piled in, dragging their wounded, their weapons still hot from firing. The moment the last boot hit the ramp, Alyssa didn't wait for clearance. She pulled back hard on the stick, the helicopter lurching upward as tracers chased them into the sky. The engines roared like beasts straining against chains. A rocket streaked past the tail, close enough to rattle the frame. The co-pilot shouted, "We're hit," but Alyssa shook her head, eyes fixed forward. "Not hit, kissed. Hold on." The bird soared over the ridge, out of immediate danger, though alarms still blinked angry red across the panel. Behind her, soldiers panted, some laughing nervously, some still silent in the shock of survival. The SEAL commander's voice finally came through, quieter now, almost reverent. "Pilot, what's your name?" "Captain Grant," she replied, her voice level. There was a pause, then the commander spoke again, the weight of sincerity breaking through the static. You just saved my men. You've got my respect, Captain. Alyssa didn't respond. She focused on guiding the helicopter toward the forward operating base, her knuckles white on the controls. Respect didn't matter out here. Survival did. By the time they touched down safely, the sky was lightening with the first streaks of dawn. Dust swirled as the rotors slowed, and the wounded were rushed to medics. Soldiers climbed out one by one, patting Alyssa on the shoulder as they passed, their eyes filled with something between gratitude and awe. The SEAL commander lingered, looking at her as though seeing her for the first time. He gave a sharp nod, then disappeared into the chaos of the base. Alone in the cockpit, Alyssa exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Her hands trembled slightly as she powered down the systems. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. She was supposed to be advising, running logistics. But war didn't wait for paperwork. It demanded decisions, and tonight she had made one that changed everything. But survival was never free. The bird had taken damage, structural maybe more. And the insurgents now knew exactly where to strike. The Valley extraction had bought lives, but it had also stirred a hornet's nest. Retaliation was coming. Everyone could feel it. When Alyssa finally stepped out of the cockpit, the Rangers and SEALs were clustered around in a loose circle, their exhaustion mixing with adrenaline. The atmosphere was electric, like men who had walked through fire and come out alive. Jokes were already flying, dark humor cracking like gunfire to push back the fear. One Ranger laughed, shaking his head. Hell, I didn't know Angels wore army patches. Another soldier smirked. She damn near killed us with that dive. I'll never eat again. Better alive and hungry than dead and full, Alyssa shot back dryly, her tone carrying enough bite to draw laughter. For the first time that night, she let a ghost of a smile appear. But as she walked toward the command tent, the smile faded. She knew what was waiting inside. Questions, paperwork maybe? Reprimands? The army didn't like when rules were bent, even for survival. And yet, deep down, Alyssa also knew something had shifted. She had stood up when no one else did and people noticed. Soldiers whispered, respect bloomed, and reputations were forged in moments like these. She ducked into the tent, where a colonel with hard eyes and a coffee mug waited. He didn't look up right away, scribbling notes on a clipboard. Captain Grant, he said finally, voice flat. Hell of a stunt you pulled. Wasn't a stunt, sir, Alyssa replied evenly. It was survival. The colonel finally looked up, studying her with a long silence. His lips twitched, almost a smirk, then faded. You saved a lot of lives tonight. But you also drew a lot of attention. Intel's already reporting increased chatter. Enemy forces are moving. You kicked the hornet's nest. I know, Alyssa said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Question is, can you handle what comes next? Alyssa didn't blink. Yes, sir. For a moment, the tent was quiet except for the hum of generators outside. Then the colonel nodded once, slow and deliberate. Good. Because whether you like it or not, Captain, you just became the point of the spear. And with those words, Alyssa realized her war had only just begun. The forward operating base never truly slept, but in the hours after dawn, when the dust from the night's chaos finally began to settle, it carried a strange quiet. Soldiers shuffled through the narrow lanes between sandbag walls and steel huts, their faces shadowed by fatigue, their movements sluggish from adrenaline burn. Helicopters idled in the background, their rotors clattering like restless bones, waiting for orders that would send them back into fire. Captain Alyssa Grant stood outside the command tent, her helmet tucked under her arm, her eyes following the horizon where the mountains loomed jagged against a pale sky. Somewhere out there, the enemy was regrouping, preparing a response to the rescue she had pulled off hours earlier. She could feel it in her bones. Nothing about last night had been clean. They had saved men, yes, but they had also embarrassed the insurgents, and war never let such things go unanswered. She wasn't given long to dwell. The colonel's aide, a lieutenant with a sharp haircut and a too-clean uniform, stepped out and gave her a curt nod. Captain, you're wanted inside. Alyssa straightened her shoulders, masking her weariness, and entered. The command tent was dim, lit by the glow of screens and maps projected on the walls. A cluster of officers bent over a table, their voices low but tense. Dotted red lines crisscrossed the terrain on display, marking roads, strongholds, possible ambush sites. The colonel looked up when she entered, his eyes calculating. Captain Grant, he said. Take a seat. She did, though the folding chair felt more like a hot seat than a place to rest. The colonel tapped a finger against the map. We have confirmed reports that enemy forces are mobilizing. Convoys spotted heading toward the valley you pulled the SEALs out of. Drones picked up comms traffic, lots of it. They're not just angry. They're planning a counterstrike. A major leaned forward, his jaw tight. Sir, we can't let them consolidate. If they dig in, we'll be facing weeks of bloody sweeps through that valley. The colonel's eyes shifted back to Alyssa. You know that terrain better than anyone now. You saw it up close, under fire. I want your assessment. The room went quiet. Alyssa felt the weight of every stare on her. She wasn't used to being asked for strategy. Her place was usually behind the stick, not at the table. But she leaned forward, tracing the ridges on the map with her finger. They'll fortify here, she said, pointing to a bottleneck at the valley's mouth. High ground, natural choke point, perfect for ambush. If we send convoys through without clearing it, we'll lose them. Her hand moved further. But their supply line runs along this ridge road. It's exposed, no cover from air assault. If we cut that, they can't hold the valley for long. A murmur ran through the officers. The major frowned. That ridge is defended. We've lost drones trying to get eyes on it. Defended or not, Alyssa said, her voice steady, if you want to break them before they break us, that's the artery you cut. The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then, with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said, looks like you're not just a pilot after all. He straightened. We'll need a strike team. Fast, surgical, and coordinated with air cover. Captain Grant, congratulations, you just volunteered. The words hit like a body blow. Alyssa blinked. Sir, I'm a pilot. You're a soldier first, the colonel countered. And right now, I need soldiers who can think on their feet. You'll fly the insertion, lead the air cover, and coordinate with ground forces. You've proven you can handle pressure. Now you're going to prove it wasn't a fluke. Alyssa wanted to argue, to remind him she wasn't supposed to even be flying missions. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Out here, survival dictated orders more than rank. She gave a sharp nod. Yes, sir. The briefing broke up soon after, officers scattering to prepare. Alyssa remained seated a moment longer, staring at the shifting lines on the map. This wasn't just another mission. This was her being pushed into a role she hadn't asked for, maybe hadn't wanted. And yet, as much as she tried to deny it, a spark inside her flared. She had always believed she was more than the army let her be. Maybe now she would finally prove it. When she stepped outside, the sun was climbing, the heat already pressing down like a hand. Soldiers hustled through the dust, loading vehicles, checking weapons, preparing for the fight that waited beyond the wire. The SEAL commander from last night approached, his gait steady despite the exhaustion etched on his face. He stopped in front of her, his eyes sharp but curious. Captain Grant. His tone carried weight, not quite formal, not quite casual. Word is you're leading the strike. So it seems, she said. He studied her a moment, then gave a short laugh. Hell of a thing. Most army pilots I've met couldn't fight their way out of a supply tent. You though, he shook his head. You fly like you've got death on your tail and stubbornness in your blood. Alyssa allowed herself a small smirk. Better stubborn than dead. He grinned at that, the first real smile she'd seen from him. My name's Commander Hale. You pulled my team out last night. I owe you. If you're going into that ridge, I'm coming with you. Thought SEALs didn't take orders from army captains, Alyssa quipped. We don't, Hale said, still smiling. But we choose who we fight beside. And right now, I choose you. There was no time for sentiment. Within hours, the mission was rolling. A mixed force of Rangers, SEALs, and a handful of Marines assembled at the flight line, their gear heavy but their eyes sharp. Alyssa climbed into the pilot's seat of a Black Hawk, her hands moving through pre-flight checks with mechanical precision, though inside her chest her heart pounded harder than the rotors ever could. The plan was simple on paper. Insert the strike team near the ridge, provide air cover while they sabotage the enemy supply line, and extract before the insurgents could mount a coordinated defense. In practice it was chaos waiting to happen. They lifted off in a tight formation, 2 Black Hawks carrying troops, an Apache gunship providing escort. The desert rolled beneath them, barren and unforgiving. Over the comms, voices crackled with nervous jokes, last-minute checks, prayers muttered under breaths. Alyssa stayed quiet, her eyes locked on the horizon, every muscle taut with anticipation. 10 minutes out, her co-pilot called. Copy, Alyssa replied. She scanned the ridge lines, the valleys, every shadow that could hide an enemy weapon. The closer they drew, the tighter her grip on the controls became. Then the first flash came, a streak of smoke from the ridge. Incoming, the gunner yelled. An RPG arced toward them. Alyssa yanked the stick, the helicopter jerking sideways, the missile streaking past so close she felt the heat through the cockpit glass. The Apache roared in response, unleashing rockets that turned the launch site into a fireball. "LZ hot," Hale's voice barked over comms. "Put us down, Captain." Alyssa pushed the bird lower, weaving through tracer fire that laced the sky like angry hornets. The clearing below was barely large enough, but she brought the helicopter in hard, skids slamming the ground. Rangers and SEALs poured out, weapons blazing, fanning into formation. The second Black Hawk touched down beside her, disgorging more troops. Bullets pinged off the armor, sparks dancing across the frame. The co-pilot swore. "We can't sit here." "Then don't," Alyssa snapped. "Lift us." They pulled back into the air, circling above as the strike team advanced toward the supply road. Below, explosions rattled the earth as soldiers planted charges, cutting off convoys, tearing through fuel trucks. The insurgents fought back, pouring down from the ridge in waves, their fire relentless. Alyssa's hands moved without thought, guiding the Black Hawk into daring angles, door gunners spitting lead into the enemy ranks. Over the comms, Hale's voice rang out, sharp but steady, "Charges set. 5 minutes to detonation." The insurgents pressed harder, desperation in their assault. Alyssa spotted a technical truck barreling toward the soldiers, a heavy gun mounted on its back. She banked hard, bringing the helicopter low, and her gunner shredded the vehicle in a storm of rounds. It erupted in flames, the blast throwing bodies into the air. 3 minutes. Hale called. Every second stretched into eternity. Sweat stung Alyssa's eyes, her arms burning from the strain of constant maneuvers. Then, suddenly, the ridge erupted. The charges blew in a chain of thunder, the supply road collapsing in fire and smoke. Convoys waiting to reinforce the valley were trapped, their path severed. The enemy's artery was cut. Objective complete. Hale shouted. "Extraction now." Alyssa swung the Black Hawk down into the clearing, rotors chopping the smoky air. Soldiers sprinted back, some dragging wounded, others firing over their shoulders. The moment the last man was aboard, Alyssa yanked the bird upward, bullets chasing them as they rose. The second helicopter lifted beside her, its engines straining under weight. But the fight wasn't over. From the ridge, another RPG streaked. This one wasn't aimed at her, it struck the second Black Hawk, fire blossoming from its tail. Alyssa's gut clenched as the helicopter spun, smoke trailing, men screaming over the comms. "Mayday! Mayday!" Without thinking, Alyssa dove toward them, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold on, I've got you." She maneuvered dangerously close, her co-pilot yelling in panic, but she ignored him. She steadied her bird alongside the crippled chopper, close enough that her gunners could cover them. "Jump!" she roared over comms. Soldiers began leaping from the burning helicopter into hers, some making it clean, others slamming hard into the bay. Her crew pulled them in one after another. Flames consumed the other bird, and finally, with a deafening roar, it exploded midair. The blast rocked Alyssa's helicopter, alarms screaming, but she held steady, pulling them away from the fireball. The cabin was chaos, men coughing, some bleeding, some shouting thanks, others sobbing in relief. Alyssa's hands trembled on the controls, but her voice stayed calm. All birds returned to base. When they finally cleared the ridge and the base came into view, silence filled the helicopter. No one joked, no one spoke. The weight of what they had done, and what they had lost, hung heavy in the air. Back on the tarmac, medics swarmed the survivors. Hale climbed out last, his face streaked with soot, his eyes burning with emotion. He turned to Alyssa, his voice low but fierce. "You didn't just lead that mission. You saved it. Save them. Don't ever doubt what you are." But Alyssa did doubt. Alone in the cockpit as the sun sank again, she stared at her reflection in the glass. She had saved lives, yes, but she had also watched a helicopter fall, men die screaming. The line between heroism and loss was razor thin, and every decision carved scars into her soul. And she knew the enemy was not finished. Tonight they would be regrouping, plotting vengeance. The war wasn't slowing. It was only just beginning. Night had draped itself over the desert once more, but the forward operating base wasn't quiet. The air throbbed with tension, the kind that crept into a soldier's bones and refused to leave. Floodlights cut harsh beams across the perimeter, watchtowers scanned the dark with night vision optics, and every sound, the scrape of boots, the clank of weapons, the hum of generators, felt louder than it should have. The men and women at the base knew something was coming. Captain Alyssa Grant sat alone at a steel table in the hangar, her helmet resting beside a cup of untouched coffee gone cold. Her body was exhausted, muscles aching from hours of flying and stress, but her mind refused to slow down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the burning helicopter from earlier that day, saw the men leaping for their lives, heard their screams swallowed by the explosion. She had pulled many out, yes, but not all. The fireball had claimed more than just bodies. It had claimed part of her certainty. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hangar. Commander Hale approached, his face drawn with fatigue but his stride steady. He carried the weight of leadership differently, like it was welded to him, unavoidable. He dropped into the chair opposite her, setting down his canteen. "You haven't slept," he said. "Neither have you," Alyssa countered. "Fair," Hale admitted. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Intel's confirmed what we suspected. The enemy isn't licking their wounds, they're gathering. Scouts spotted convoys moving south toward us. Not probing attacks, not harassment. They're massing for something bigger." Alyssa rubbed her temples. "How big?" Hale's eyes hardened. "Big enough that this base won't hold without air support. Big enough they're willing to throw bodies at us until the ground drinks blood. They're angry, Captain. You cut their supply line. You embarrassed them. Now they want to make an example." She sat back, exhaling slowly. "When?" "Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. Depends how fast they can organize. Either way, command's on edge." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the buzz of overhead lights. Then Hale gave a dry chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Funny thing. A few days ago half the brass barely knew your name. Now they can't stop saying it." Alyssa glanced at him sharply. "That a compliment or a warning?" "Both," Hale said. "You've made yourself visible. That's a double-edged blade. You're the hero who saved the SEALs, who led the strike, who pulled survivors from a burning bird. But the higher you climb in their eyes, the faster they'll drop you if you stumble." She met his gaze, steady despite the ache in her chest. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No one ever does," Hale replied softly. The hangar door banged open before either could say more. A young sergeant burst in, his face pale, breath ragged. "Captain, Commander, you're needed in the TOC. Now." They hurried across the base, boots pounding the dirt, the night air sharp against their skin. The Tactical Operations Center was a hive of frantic energy. Radios chattered nonstop, maps flickered on digital screens, officers barked orders. The colonel stood at the center, his jaw clenched. Recon drones spotted enemy columns moving through the North Pass, he announced the moment Alyssa and Hale entered. "Looks like 2, maybe 3 battalions worth. Vehicles, technicals, mortars. They're setting up for a siege." The major she remembered from before cursed under his breath. "We can't repel that with what we've got. Our defenses will crumble." The colonel's gaze flicked to Alyssa. "We need eyes and air. Captain Grant, I want you in the sky within the hour. Take your bird, scout their movements, hit them where you can, and feed us coordinates. You'll be our eyes and our hammer." Alyssa straightened. "Yes, sir." "Commander Hale," the colonel continued, "you'll coordinate ground defenses. If they breach the perimeter, it's your men who'll plug the holes." Hale gave a crisp nod. "Understood." Orders flew like bullets after that. Alyssa barely had time to process before she was striding back to the flight line, her crew already prepping the Black Hawk. The smell of fuel and oil filled her lungs, grounding her. The rotors loomed overhead like the blades of fate, ready to carve into the night. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Marks, jogged up, his eyes wide with nerves. "Captain, are we seriously going back up there tonight?" "We don't have a choice," Alyssa said. She clapped him on the shoulder, forcing calm into her tone. "You handle the instruments, I'll handle the rest. We'll get through this." He nodded, swallowing hard, and climbed in. Minutes later, the Black Hawk lifted into the dark, joined by an Apache gunship. The desert stretched below, shadows shifting under the pale glow of moonlight. Alyssa's eyes scanned constantly, searching for movement, heat signatures, anything. It didn't take long. Columns of headlights snaked through the pass, dozens of vehicles kicking up trails of dust. Trucks loaded with fighters, technicals bristling with heavy guns, mortar crews setting up positions. The sight stole Alyssa's breath for half a second. It was more than she expected. More than anyone at the base could handle if they reached the perimeter. "Command, this is Reaper 1, she radioed in, voice tight. "Visual on enemy force. Estimate, hell, at least 3 battalions. Repeat, 3 battalions. They're advancing through North Pass about 15 clicks out." The colonel's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Reaper 1. Paint targets for the Apache. Do what you can to slow them down. Alyssa's jaw set. Roger. She guided the Black Hawk low, just above the ridges, while the Apache broke off to set up firing runs. Over comms, she coordinated strikes, marking convoys with her laser. Rockets streaked down, explosions ripping vehicles apart, scattering fighters like ants. The desert lit up with fire, smoke curling into the night. But the insurgents didn't falter. For every truck destroyed, another pushed forward. For every squad broken, 2 more surged into the gap. Anti-air fire erupted from the convoy, tracers stabbing upward. Alyssa banked hard, the helicopter jolting as bullets tore past. Taking heavy fire. Mark shouted. Hold steady. Alyssa snapped, weaving through the storm. She felt the bird shudder as rounds pinged off the armor, alarms whining in her ears. The Apache unleashed hell, tearing through a cluster of vehicles, but even as they burned, more spilled from the pass. Command, Alyssa called, her voice grim, they're not stopping. Even with losses, they'll hit us before dawn. The colonel didn't hesitate. Then buy us time, Captain. Every second you keep them off us is a second we strengthen the perimeter. The battle became a blur of motion and fire. Alyssa danced the Black Hawk through the sky, dodging rockets, coordinating strikes, directing ground artillery from the base. Her gunners poured fire into the convoys, cutting down fighters scrambling for cover. The Apache roared like a dragon, but even dragons grew tired. Ammo dwindled. Fuel ran low. Hours passed like minutes. Finally, Alyssa heard the colonel's voice again. Reaper 1, we've done all we can here. Fall back to base before you're out of fuel. We'll brace for the hit. Alyssa hesitated, staring down at the still advancing horde. Pulling back felt like abandoning the field, like leaving the fight unfinished. But orders were orders. She turned the Black Hawk back toward the base, every nerve screaming at the thought of what was coming. When she landed, dawn was bleeding into the sky. Soldiers scrambled everywhere, fortifying walls, laying mines, setting up machine gun nests. The base looked less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress waiting for the storm. Hale met her on the flight line, his face grim. You bought us hours. It'll have to be enough. Alyssa slid out of the cockpit, her body trembling with exhaustion, her throat raw from shouting over comms. Hours won't stop what's coming. No, Hale agreed. But sometimes hours mean the difference between survival and annihilation. As the sun rose, the first shells fell. Mortar rounds whistled from the ridges, slamming into the base, shaking the ground. Dirt and debris exploded into the air. Sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled to positions. The siege had begun. Alyssa barely had time to register before another explosion rocked the base, closer this time. She grabbed her rifle from the rack, slinging it across her chest. Hale glanced at her, eyebrows raised. Pilot or not, she said, chambering around, I'm not sitting this out. Hale grinned, teeth flashing despite the chaos. Good. Because they're coming fast. Through the smoke and dust, figures appeared on the horizon, hundreds of them swarming toward the wire. Gunfire erupted, a thunderous chorus of defense. Alyssa raised her weapon, heart pounding. She wasn't behind the stick now. She was on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with the men and women she had flown for. Every decision she had made had led to this moment. And as the enemy poured forward like a flood, Alyssa knew the real test was only beginning. The silence after the blast was not really silence at all. It was the ringing aftermath of chaos, distant gunfire, the crackle of radios, boots scrambling on broken stone, the low moans of the wounded. Captain Elena Cruz pushed herself up from the rubble, dust streaking her face and her ears still buzzing from the explosion that had torn apart the northern wall of the compound. Her first thought wasn't for herself but for her soldiers. She scanned the wreckage, the haze, the figures moving through it with desperate urgency. Status report, she shouted, her voice hoarse but commanding. Sergeant Darnell emerged from the smoke, one arm bleeding heavily, his other dragging Private Lewis, who was coughing hard but alive. We got scattered, ma'am. That charge took out the wall and half the communications gear. I've got at least 2 down inside, Darnell reported, his face pale but steady. Elena's mind snapped into clarity despite the chaos. They were still under fire, still exposed, still alive. Decisions had to be made quickly, or more names would be carved into the wall of memory she carried behind her eyes. Set up a defensive perimeter on the south side. Get Lewis on triage and someone patch you up before you bleed out. Where's Jenkins? She demanded. Darnell shook his head. Didn't see him after the blast. Her stomach tightened. Jenkins was their radio operator, their lifeline to air support. If he was gone, they were cut off. Gunfire snapped over the rubble. She ducked low, pulling her rifle to her shoulder, and answered with precise shots. 2 enemy fighters went down in the distance, but more shadows pressed in through the breach. They were coming fast, coordinated, sensing weakness. Corporal Diaz slid in beside her, breathing hard. "They're flanking through the breach, Captain. We need to move now or we'll be boxed in." Elena's options were narrowing by the second. They could fall back deeper into the compound, but that risked being trapped. They could push out, but without heavy support it could be suicide. She made her call. "Diaz, get a fire team to cover the breach. Lay down suppressive fire. I'll find Jenkins and see if we still have a line to air support. Hold them as long as you can, no heroics, just keep them back." "Yes, ma'am," Diaz barked, rallying 3 soldiers who scrambled into position. Elena sprinted through the wreckage, her heart pounding not from fear but from the calculation of risk, the weight of command. She found Jenkins half buried under debris near the shattered comm station. He was alive but barely, blood running down the side of his head, his radio crushed beneath a fallen beam. "Jenkins, stay with me," she urged, pulling debris off him with a grunt. His eyes fluttered open, dazed but determined. "Captain, radio's gone. No signal, but backup pack," he whispered. His hand weakly gestured toward a corner where his secondary unit lay in the dust. She grabbed it, flicked it on, and prayed. Static hissed, then cleared enough for her to push out a desperate transmission. "This is Captain Elena Cruz, forward element, requesting immediate close air support. We are under heavy assault, multiple hostiles breaching our position. Coordinates transmitting, get us fire on target now." The line crackled, uncertain, but then a voice came back. "Copy, Captain. CS inbound ETA 6 minutes. Hold your ground." 6 minutes? A lifetime in combat. Elena looked back toward the breach where Diaz's team was laying down a desperate wall of fire. She saw one of her soldiers go down, hit in the chest. Diaz dragged him back, firing with his free hand. They were buying time, bleeding for it. She returned to Jenkins, pressing a field dressing to his wound. "Stay with me. You did your job. You saved us all." He gave a faint, pained smile. "Just don't let them take this place, Captain." Her chest tightened, but she forced herself back on her feet. She couldn't break. Not now. She moved fast, rallying the scattered survivors, pulling them into a tighter defensive circle. Ammunition was low, morale was bleeding out with the wounded, but they still had fight in them. The enemy pressed harder, rounds snapping through the air, grenades clattering near their cover. Elena picked one up and hurled it back before it detonated, the blast rocking the wall outside. She laughed grimly despite herself. "Nice try," she muttered. A sudden scream cut through the noise, Private Lewis, the young one, barely 19, clutching his leg where shrapnel tore through. Elena dragged him behind cover, applied a tourniquet, her hand steady even as her gut twisted at his pain. "You're not dying today, soldier. You hear me? You're going home," she said firmly. His wide eyes locked on hers, and something in his trembling face steadied. Minutes crawled like hours. They held, firing in bursts, conserving rounds. Diaz kept shouting encouragement, mixing humor with fury. "Come on, you bastards, I've got more bullets with your names on them than letters in the alphabet." His defiance drew a rough cheer from the men even as they bled. Finally, the roar of jet engines split the air. Elena looked up and saw 2 F-16s streak overhead, their shadows slicing across the battlefield. A heartbeat later, ordnance rained down on the advancing hostiles. Explosions ripped the earth, fire and dust consuming the attackers. The ground shook under the assault, and then there was silence. Real silence, heavy and thick with smoke and the stench of burned metal. Her soldiers slumped in relief, some cheering weakly, others just staring blankly, too numb to process survival. Elena didn't cheer. She stood, rifle still in her hands, scanning the haze for movement. Survival wasn't victory. Not yet. Secure the perimeter. Gather the wounded. "We're not out of this," she ordered. Her voice cut through the fatigue, pulling her people back into focus. Hours later, as medevac birds finally touched down to carry the worst of the wounded, Elena stood apart, her body aching, her hands still trembling slightly though she refused to show it. She watched as Jenkins was lifted onto a stretcher, barely conscious but alive. Lewis gave her a shaky thumbs up as he was carried away, his face pale but determined. Darnell approached, his arm in a sling. "Captain, we lost 7. Another dozen wounded. But we held the line." Elena closed her eyes briefly, the weight of 7 more names settling onto her soul. She forced them open again, meeting his gaze. "We held. That matters. They'll write about this day, but we'll remember it for the cost." That night, under a canopy of stars dimmed by smoke, Elena sat with her soldiers around a dim lantern. They were too exhausted to celebrate, but too alive not to feel the strange edge of humor that comes after near death. Diaz broke the silence with a grin. "Captain, I swear you threw that grenade back like you were pitching in the World Series. You sure you're not hiding a baseball career under that uniform?" Laughter rippled through the weary group, small but real. Elena smirked. "If I had been, I'd be retired on a beach right now, not patching holes in this godforsaken desert." Even Darnell cracked a grin. "Beach sounds nice. Drinks, no sand in your boots, no bullets flying at your head." They laughed again, and for a moment the war faded, replaced by the fragile humanity they clung to. But when the laughter died, Elena sat in silence, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. Her thoughts returned to the faces of the fallen, the decisions that had led them here, the choices that would lead them again tomorrow. And somewhere in that darkness she felt the war still watching, still waiting, promising that this night of survival was only one chapter in a longer, harsher story. She clenched her fists, whispered a promise to herself and to those she led: "We'll endure. We'll fight. And we won't break." The SEALs stormed the stadium like ghosts, their night vision lenses glowing faintly, rifles barking with deadly precision. Within minutes, the pressure on Sarah's squad lifted, the relentless tide of insurgents broken by a sudden, overwhelming force. Still, Sarah didn't relax. She knew better than to think a fight was over just because the shooting slowed. "Captain Miles?" A tall SEAL approached, helmet low, voice calm but clipped. He had the steady air of someone who'd seen too many battles. "That's me," Sarah said, brushing blood and dust from her sleeve. "Lieutenant Harris, SEAL Team 7, he introduced. He didn't waste time. "We're ordered to extract you. Birds inbound now that we've cleared anti-air nests. But there's a problem." Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course there was. "What problem?" Harris pointed east toward the city center. "Command's tracking movement, large enemy convoy rolling in. Technicals, mortars, maybe heavier. If they reach this sector, we'll all be pinned. Helicopters won't risk landing." Her chest clenched. They'd fought all night for this chance at survival, and now the window was closing again. Harris went on, "We need someone to take out that convoy before it hits. Fast and clean. Air support can't get here in time." Sarah glanced at her squad, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. Thompson lay pale and still, Torres kneeling at his side, whispering encouragement. Walker's face was set like stone, but his hands trembled as he reloaded. They couldn't take another push, not in this state. Harris studied her carefully. "Command mentioned you're qualified combat aviation. Is that true?" Sarah stiffened. She hadn't heard those words in years. Before the Army infantry, before she chose to lead boots on the ground, she'd flown Apaches. She'd been good, damn good. But a crash on her third deployment, a cockpit fire, and the loss of her co-pilot had sent her down a different road. She'd buried that chapter, but it had never really left her. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It's true. Then we've got a bird waiting." Harris's tone carried no doubt, no hesitation. "You fly. You stop that convoy. Or none of us leave." Her squad looked at her, disbelief mingling with fear. Reed muttered, "Captain, you can't?" "I can," Sarah cut him off. She stood taller, though her body screamed in protest. "I will." Torres called after her, voice breaking. "But what if you don't come back?" Sarah met his gaze, the weight of command pressing down harder than ever. "Then you remember that I went because we needed it. Because you deserve to make it home." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them. Then Walker saluted, grim respect in his eyes. "Bring us that window, ma'am." Sarah turned to Harris. "Show me the way." They moved fast, slipping through the stadium's underbelly and into the broken streets beyond. The SEALs moved like predators, silent and lethal, clearing corners with effortless precision. Sarah felt almost clumsy among them, but she kept pace. Finally, they reached a hidden courtyard where an Apache sat waiting, rotors folded, camo netting draped over its hulking frame. The sight hit Sarah like a gut punch. She hadn't been this close to one since the crash, but the machine still felt like part of her, an old wound and an old friend all at once. A crew chief approached, breathless. "Birds fueled and armed. We just need someone who can fly it. Command says you're it." Sarah climbed into the cockpit. The seat embraced her like a memory, the controls familiar beneath her hands despite the years. Her heart pounded. She saw fire, smoke, her co-pilot screaming. She forced the image away. "Not now." Harris leaned in through the side hatch. "We'll cover your squad until you're done. Hit them hard, Captain. Then come back. Sarah nodded once. I will. The rotors spun to life, blades slicing the air with a roar that shook her bones. Dust swirled around the courtyard, the smell of fuel burning her nose. She strapped in, checked systems, felt the vibration build. When the Apache lifted, the city fell beneath her like a broken toy. Streets stretched out in jagged lines, fires glowing like wounds in the dark. She angled east, eyes scanning through the targeting display. And then she saw them. A convoy snaking through the main avenue, pickups mounted with heavy guns, flatbeds stacked with mortars, dozens of fighters bristling with weapons. They moved with purpose, their engines growling like an advancing beast. If they reached the stadium, her squad would be crushed. Sarah's breath slowed. Training returned like muscle memory. She armed the rockets, lined up the shot, and whispered, "For you, Thompson. For all of us." She fired. The first explosion tore through the lead technical, flipping it into a ball of flame. Fighters scattered, but the Apache's wrath followed. Rockets screamed down, ripping through the convoy. Trucks exploded in fiery bursts, metal raining across the street. Machine gun tracers clawed upward, but Sarah banked hard, dodging the arcs of fire. Her hands moved like they remembered every switch, every sequence. She raked the column with the chain gun, chewing through steel and flesh alike. Men fell, screaming, the convoy disintegrating beneath her assault. But the enemy adapted. RPGs streaked up, one exploding too close, rattling her teeth and spraying the cockpit with shrapnel. Warning lights blinked red. Smoke curled from the left engine. She gritted her teeth. Not today. She pushed harder, diving low, unleashing the last of her rockets. The convoy shattered, vehicles burning, mortars destroyed, fighters scattering like ants from a drowning hill. Breathing hard, Sarah pulled the Apache into a climb, eyes scanning. The avenue below was chaos, but the threat was gone. She bought them time. "Command, this is Eagle One," she said into the comm, voice raw but steady. "Convoy neutralized." "Repeat, convoy neutralized." Static crackled, then Command replied, "Copy Eagle One. Extraction inbound. Hold position." Sarah exhaled shakily, but the fight wasn't done. As she banked back toward the stadium, another plume of smoke rose from the west. More vehicles. More fighters. The city was endless, enemies pouring in like a tide. Her chest tightened. She had nothing left to fire, half her systems were failing, and her squad was waiting on her. She could turn back, land, join them, hope the SEALs and helicopters held long enough. Or she could make a choice she'd sworn she'd never face again. Her thumb hovered over the last weapon system, one she hadn't wanted to use. A full load of Hydra rockets meant for area suppression, devastating but indiscriminate. If she loosed them on the western road, she could break the next wave, but civilians might be caught in the fire. She froze, memories crashing back. The fire. The civilians in the village she hadn't been able to save. The guilt that had chased her into the infantry. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "What do I choose?" And then she heard Torres's voice in her mind, young and scared, "What if you don't come back?" She gripped the controls, eyes blazing. "Then at least I make it count." The Apache dove once more. Rockets streaked down, tearing the western road apart. Fire rolled across the horizon, fighters scattering in panic. When the smoke cleared, the road was broken, impassable. The tide had been stemmed, at least for now. Sarah turned the crippled Apache back toward the stadium, the controls heavy in her hands. Warning alarms blared, but she kept it steady. The helicopter limped across the skyline, flames licking from its side. Below, she saw them, her squad and the SEALs holding a perimeter, tracer fire arcing into the night. And beyond them, the blessed sight of inbound helicopters sweeping low, rotors chopping the air. Extraction was here. Sarah smiled through blood and sweat. She'd done it. They had a chance. But as she brought the Apache closer, her vision blurred. The alarms screamed louder, the smoke thickened. She realized she might not make it to land. Her hand gripped the controls one last time and she whispered, "Get them home." The Apache bucked, engine failing. The ground rushed up. And the world went white. The Apache hit the ground like a hammer. The explosion split the night, fire and metal tearing upward as the helicopter broke apart. The shockwave rolled across the stadium, knocking men flat, rattling broken concrete. For a moment, no one moved. Even the insurgents who'd survived the earlier assaults froze, staring at the column of flame clawing into the sky. Walker was the first to react. "Captain," he roared, scrambling up from behind cover. Torres grabbed his arm, dragging him back as another burst of gunfire swept the perimeter. "Stay down," Torres shouted. "She's gone." She's not. Walker snarled, eyes wild, muscles straining. Don't you dare say that. But there was no time to argue. The SEAL Lieutenant Harris barked orders, voice hard and unshaken. Hold the line. Birds are 30 seconds out. You break now, we all die. The squad tightened formation, firing in controlled bursts as shadows darted between ruins. The city seemed alive with enemies, pouring from alleys and rooftops, desperate to crush the Americans before they could escape. Sarah's squad fought with a fury born of desperation. Reed's face was pale, lips moving in a steady string of curses and prayers. Torres, his wounded shoulder bleeding through his bandage, kept his rifle tucked tight, firing one-handed when he had to. Even Thompson, propped against rubble with his leg useless, gripped his pistol with shaking hands, shooting at anything that moved too close. The sound of rotors grew louder. Then, over the burning wreckage, the helicopters swept in, 2 Black Hawks, side doors already open, miniguns roaring as they scythed through enemy positions. The battlefield lit up in tracer fire, dust, and screams. Move! Harris shouted. Go, go, go! The squad broke cover, sprinting for the landing zone under the cover of the Black Hawk's guns. Walker half-carried Thompson, teeth bared in grim determination. Reed stumbled twice but kept moving, Torres dragging him when his legs faltered. Sarah's squad hit the first helicopter, climbing aboard with the SEALs. Harris shoved them in, covering the rear as bullets pinged against the armor. The Black Hawk lifted, rotor wash slamming them against the deck. For a moment, relief washed over them. They were airborne, leaving the nightmare behind. But Walker's eyes locked on the burning wreckage of the Apache below. She's out there, he muttered. Torres shook his head. You saw it? Nobody survives that. Walker's jaw clenched. She's tougher than you think. The words barely left his mouth when the radio cracked. Static hissed, then a broken, ragged voice cut through. Eagle? 1, still here. Every head snapped toward the handset. Reed's hands shook as he grabbed it. Captain? Say again, Captain? The voice came clearer, weaker but unmistakable. This is Captain Miles. Crash site secure, can't move. Heavy smoke, enemy closing. Don't leave me. The Black Hawk fell silent except for the pounding of the rotors. Harris cursed under his breath, then leaned toward the pilot. Turn back. We've got a survivor. The pilot's reply was sharp. Negative. Command says get the rest out now. LZ's hot, we'll lose both birds if we linger. Walker surged forward, grabbing Harris by the vest. You don't get it, she's our captain. We don't leave her. Harris shoved him back, eyes blazing. I do get it. But if we swing back, everyone dies. You want her sacrifice to mean nothing? Torres's voice cracked, raw with grief and fury. She's alive, damn it. We can't just abandon her. The squad erupted, voices clashing, desperation boiling over. The Black Hawk bucked in the air, tracer fire streaking past the windows. And then Sarah's voice cut in again, calm despite the pain behind it. Listen to me. You get them out. That's an order. Walker slammed a fist against the wall. No. You don't pull rank on this, Captain. We're coming for you. Walker. Her tone softened. Don't make me die knowing you disobeyed me. Get them home. The radio fell silent. The squad stared at one another, torn apart by duty, loyalty, and love for their commander. Harris's face was stone, but his voice was quieter when he spoke. We'll mark her position. If she's alive, another team will go. Right now your job is survival. The words burned, but they knew he was right. One by one, they slumped back into their seats, the weight of guilt crushing them as the city fell away beneath the Black Hawk's shadow. On the ground, Sarah lay pinned in the wreckage, flames licking close, smoke searing her lungs. Her leg was trapped under twisted steel, every breath a battle. She'd used the last of her strength to key the radio, to hear her squad one more time. She could still see them in her mind, Torres's wide eyes, Reed's trembling hands, Walker's stubborn jaw. They were alive. That was enough. She pressed her head back against the shattered console, the roar of distant gunfire mingling with the crackle of flames. Her hands shook as she reached for the sidearm still strapped to her thigh. If the insurgents came, she wouldn't go quietly. But another sound reached her through the smoke, boots crunching on debris. Not rushed, not chaotic. Purposeful. Figures appeared, silhouettes against the fire. Not SEALs. Not her squad. Enemies. Sarah tightened her grip on her pistol, forcing her body upright despite the agony tearing through her leg. Her voice rasped like gravel. Come on then. The insurgents stopped, eyes glinting in the firelight. One said something in a language she couldn't understand, and the others laughed. They didn't shoot. They didn't rush. They circled, studying her like a prize animal. Sarah's heart pounded. She realized what this meant. They weren't here to kill her. They were here to take her. Back aboard the Black Hawk, silence hung heavy. Torres stared blankly at the floor, lips moving as if whispering to someone unseen. Reed's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thompson drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering Sarah's name. Walker sat rigid, fists clenched so tight his knuckles bled. His eyes burned with fury, but deeper than that was something worse, guilt. He'd let her go. He'd listen when she told them to leave. Harris finally broke the silence. You need to be ready for this. She may be alive. But if she's captured. Don't say it, Walker snapped. Someone has to, Harris shot back. If she's taken, they'll use her. For propaganda. For intel. They'll break her if they can. Torres swallowed hard, voice trembling. Then we go back. We find her. No matter what. Reed looked up hollow-eyed. We're barely alive ourselves. What if command says she's gone? What if they tell us to move on? Walker's voice was low, steady, dangerous. Then we don't listen. She's our captain. We owe her everything. And I don't care what command says, we're going back for her.